Welcome to Tales She Told Me, a podcast featuring honest conversation about what it means to be a woman, a mother, and in business. I'm your host, Farrah Haidar. Today, we will be discussing finances, and joining me is Rachael Burns. Rachael is a certified financial planner and certified divorce financial analyst based in Folsom, California. She is the founder of True Worth Financial Planning, which helps newly single women achieve financial independence after divorce or the death of a spouse. Through her own personal experience navigating trauma and finances, she found her calling to support and empower other women during the most challenging transitions of their lives. So, welcome to you, Rachael. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this episode is that I think that finances are really the cornerstone of liberation, right? People have a lot of interesting views when it comes to money. Some hate it, some love it, some are super focused on it, some think it's evil. And I've always found it really funny how we project these kind of value systems onto this inanimate object, right? I also feel like as a society, we just don't teach enough about money. We don't talk enough about money and all that. And even myself, I give myself a C plus when it comes to money, right? So why don't we start with, what inspired you to take on this line of work?
Sure. So I've been a financial planner for quite a few years, and I started my career in what I would call the very traditional wealth management industry, which is very, very different than what I'm doing now. And back in those days, I didn't have a lot of autonomy or ability to kind of get creative in who I served or how I served them. It was kind of like you go find people who have a whole bunch of money and you manage their investments for them. And that was that. And I didn't really know that there were other ways of doing things. And I kind of got familiar with a different type of business model where you don't work for a big firm, you start your own firm, and you don't have to sell investments. You can just give people advice and you can help people plan, and that doesn't have to be attached to investing a whole bunch of money. So what happened is, instead of only working with the top 1% of the population who could actually afford the minimums, I could work with who needed help, who I felt like I could help. And
Yeah.
when I started my own business, I had the ability to specialize in whatever I wanted to specialize in. And all through my career, I always loved working with women who were going through some sort of difficult transition in their lives. Because with a lot of big transitions that women face in their lives, there's usually a big financial component of that transition.
Yeah.
And it just makes it extra stressful because most people, I would say the average person, feels like they don't know what they're doing with their finances. Even if they actually do, they don't think that they do. So there's a lot of insecurity with that. And so I found that I really enjoyed helping women who were going through it alone, who were going through some sort of life change and had a whole bunch of financial changes that they needed to navigate. And back in the day, I was like excited whenever one of those people kind of fall into my lap. But when I started working for myself, I was like, I'm just going to work with those types of women. And I get to say that because I'm the boss.
Exactly. Yep.
And it's been the best thing ever. And there's no shortage of women who are in that position, and I can help them in a way that's flexible to their needs. And I'm not like, oh yeah, I can help you if you have $1 million.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you don't need to have that. If you need help, then we can figure out a way to get you some help. And so that's just been
So
the,
I'd love to clarify some things because I
sure.
think I have a background. My entire family's in banking. I used to work for a bank, so I can kind of understand when you say wealth management. But let's assume the average listener doesn't really understand what that means, right? And what you mean when we say we invest our money, like is it 401ks? Is it stocks? Is it, how could you clarify a little bit about what you mean with that? And then we're going to go into how your method is different. And I'd love to hear your backstory as well. So
Sure.
got a lot going on here.
Sure. So if wealth management doesn't sound familiar, it's because it only applies to a very, very small part of the population. And in order to be in need of wealth management services, it means you have a significant amount of money that's not in your house, that's not in your 401k at work. You literally have an account with like several hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can move around at your discretion. And you're like, hey, I want to hire someone to take a whole bunch of money and make more money out of it. And that's basically what wealth management is. Sometimes there's a financial planning component to it as well. So sometimes, the advisor will help them navigate certain decisions and all this stuff, but really it's focused on managing the investments for your hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very specific service that only applies to a small part of the population.
Mm-hmm.
But when someone's like, oh, I need financial advice, it's not clear what you're getting from these different types of professionals. It's like a very kind of murky
Yeah.
industry. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but there's a lot of confusion. So if you were someone who was like, you know what, I'm just getting I'm just getting going in my career, and I really want to make sure I'm making the right decisions about, how much I'm saving for retirement, or maybe I'm just going through a divorce and I have this settlement and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this to make it last. That doesn't mean that you have several $100,000 to go meet a minimum to go get a financial advisor at a big firm. So it's like, where do you go for that advice? And there's kind of this gap because there's clearly a need. There's a huge need. And there's not a ton of professionals out there who specialize in that type of service or specialize in that part of the population.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So what was your personal motivation, and how is what you do now different?
So I I spent several years in that way of doing things, and I was fine with it because I didn't know that anything else existed. So I was fine. I was fine for a long time until I figured out that I could do it a different way. And what I experienced in my personal life changed the way I thought about my career and changed my goals for my life. And about 5 years ago, I found out I was pregnant with twins around the same time that I found out that my husband was diagnosed with brain cancer.
Oh,
and so like we had, one day our life is this way, and then like a couple days later, everything that we've ever thought is out the window. Everything is totally different. We have no idea what the future holds. And the next year was very, very chaotic. There was a lot of treatment, surgeries, radiation, me getting pregnant, more and more pregnant every day with these twins. And like, it was just this really kind of traumatizing time. And when things settled down after that, because he actually has been doing really well ever since his surgery, which is really unusual for that type of cancer.
congrats.
But yeah, he's doing great. But after the dust kind of settled there, I was like, I'm not just going to work for the sake of going to work anymore. I need to spend my time wisely, because I know from experience how precious time is, how precious your health is, how precious your body is. And I don't want to squander another second doing something that I'm not super passionate about. And I didn't even realize I wasn't passionate about it until I kind of went through that. And so I was like, I want to take the favorite parts of my job and keep those and get rid of all the rest.
Yes.
I want to keep my favorite clients and just work with people like that and not work with the rest. And I just knew what I wanted to do. And I knew that because of what I had gone through and because of my professional background, I was in a position where I could help other women who are going through difficult times, help them navigate these financial changes, because I've done it myself on a professional level and on a personal level. And I was like, I have this, out of this crappy situation that we just went through, I feel like I got this gift out of it that like, I can help alleviate some suffering in other women, at least from the financial perspective. And there's a surprising amount of emotional suffering that comes out of money. So I'm like, that's something I can help with in a really meaningful way. And that's what I want to do with my life from now on. Like, that's my thing. I have my family, I have my personal, whatever, but like my passion is my career. And I have found the perfect career for me that I'm perfectly suited for. So I'm like a happy girl.
That's awesome. I love I think that there's, I know several women, anytime you talk to a woman, like it's so funny to me. One of the first things that comes up for a lot of women when I talk to them, whether they're happy or unhappy in their marriage, is their finances. It is entrapping. It can be entrapping. It's like, okay, like, oh, if I'm unhappy and I leave, what happens now, right? So do you see like a common mistake or a big mistake that especially women make regarding money?
Yes. And that mistake is, I see it in married women, divorced women, whatever, all sorts of women. They give up their power when it comes to money, and they do it in different ways. But if they're married, a lot of times they will say, okay, my husband's the one who is good at this, or he wants to do it, so I'm just going to let him do it all. And yeah, it's like a chore that's been lifted off your plate, I suppose, but you get so disconnected from it and you don't know what's going on. And the lack of information means a lack of power. You lack,
Yeah.
you're not part of the decision making. You're not clued in on what's actually going on. And you give up so much power, which may not be a problem until, if for whatever reason you guys aren't together anymore. And then you're
Yeah.
like, now what do I do? And I work with so many women who are just going through a divorce, and they're like, my husband's been doing this the whole time. And because he has the power and he has the information, it gives them the upper hand in the divorce process. And women can be in
Yep.
a really vulnerable situation because of the lack of awareness of their finances. And
Absolutely. Yep.
it's so common. It's nothing to feel bad about. It is seriously so common. Like, I would say most people have this kind of dynamic in their relationship. And it doesn't have to be the man's in charge, or it's like, just there's a division of labor in relationships. And that's just something that's super common. So it's not anyone's fault that that's the way it is, but it is something that you can take back that power. If you're still married, if you're no longer married, whatever, you can take back that power. Money is not something that has power over you. Like you said, money is this
Mhm.
inanimate object that we attach all sorts of emotional baggage to. But you have to remember, money's just paper or whatever. I
Just
mean,
currency.
it's obviously important. It lets us do things that we need to do, like eat and live somewhere and stuff, but like it's not this highly emotional thing. It's not something that's judging us. We are assigning these feelings to it. And so
Absolutely.
even if you've given up your power in the past, you can get it back, and it's not going to happen overnight, and may not be super easy, but like, you can learn what you need to know, and you can start doing what you need to do to have more power in your own financial situation.
Mhm.
And that can give you more power in your relationship. I mean,
Yeah.
I see so many divorces that result from financial troubles, which is an imbalance of power, and it's just so common.
So let's say you're married and you have not been involved in a lot of the financial decisions, um, and you want to educate yourself, like, right? Where would you start? What would be
I
something you do?
I would say the best way to start, and this is not going to be possible for everyone, but opening up communication with your partner about the finances. Like, hey, I have an interest in this. I think it's good for me to know. What if something happens? What if you're in the hospital and you can't, do whatever you need
Hmm.
to do? Like, if you can come at it from that angle and try to open up those types of conversations with your partner, so that you know what they know and you know what they're doing. And also let them know that, hey, this is a partnership. Like, I want to be involved in this, like you are. I think that is a really great first step. And but not everyone has that kind of relationship. Some people
Yeah.
are intentionally kept in the dark, and that is extremely common. And in that case, you're not going to be able to just say, hey, show me what you're doing. They're going to hide things. And
Hmm.
that's there's no way to, I don't know how to deal with someone like that, but you are
Yeah.
legally entitled to information on things that you own together. So if you
Yeah.
own accounts together, if you have debts together, even if you're partner's the one that has all the logins or whatever, you are legally entitled to that information. You can call the financial institution and be like, can I see some statements, or can I see activity for going back, or just
Mhm.
you can get that information. That is legal. You are entitled to that, even if your
Yeah.
spouse is saying you're not.
Yeah.
Unless it's just in their name, then technically you can't. But a lot of things are not just in their name. A lot of times it's jointly held things.
Well, and you also have to know your state's laws, right? Like a house could be technically in their name, but because of state law, simply because you're their spouse, you are entitled to know about the house, or they can't sell the house without you. I had a friend of mine that went through a divorce, and her husband just handed her something to sign, and she trusting him signed it and didn't realize that it was literally giving him the power to sell the house, even though technically she was his spouse, and she didn't want to sell the house.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, you got to determine your level of trust in the relationship. But yeah, absolutely. I think you should at the very least have ability to access the accounts. If you're not, at least have some information about them, maybe have a, monthly meeting with your spouse. Let's just go over things, see where we're
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
Um, so I totally agree with that. But, there's obviously managing money, and then there's planning for the future, right? So some women, I'll be honest, some women are planning to get out
Yeah.
of a relationship or a situation, or they know their spouse is ill and are planning for that. What are some of the things they should do when they're planning for that? Like, and the different phases of their lives. Like if you're just starting out and everything's hunky dory versus you're in a potential divorce or potential illness, et cetera.
No matter what situation you're in, I think gathering as much detail on your current finances is a great starting point, because you need to know what you're working with. And if you're just starting out and you have nothing, that's fine, but you just got to know that. And then if let's say you're in a marriage and you're not sure how things are going to go,
Mhm.
you should get an idea of where you stand, because that's going to give you an idea of what things would look like potentially post split. And so
Yeah.
what I see, or what I hear a lot of, is where women will call me and say, I want to get divorced. My husband is blah, 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 but I feel like I can't because he's saying that the money is his, or he's saying that I won't get child support, or he's saying whatever ridiculous lies. And I think having an idea of what you actually have and what things might look like on the other side can help you make decisions when you're considering leaving, because there's so many misconceptions about what that looks like on the other side. A lot of times it looks a lot better than they think, because it's not actually going according to how their husband thinks it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard, I mean, I've heard like knowing the type of instrument your wealth is in as well. Like some people, yes, they have cash on hand. Some people it's 401k. Some people it's stock.
Yeah.
And when it's something variable like that, where it's market value driven, right? The date of separation is actually incredibly important,
Yes,
correct?
absolutely.
And why don't you explain why? Since
Yeah.
I brought
So,
it up. Yeah.
well, so when you're splitting up assets, if you're getting divorced, um, let's say everything was earned during the marriage and it's all just going to get split 50-50, just to make it
Mhm.
easy. Um, things look like they're worth something, but they're not. So I'll give you an example of that. If you have let's say you have a house and you have a 401k and you have a checking account, let's say they're all worth the same amount of money, but they're so different. Each of those three different assets are so different. So the checking account, super straightforward. You understand how it works. You can get money out of it whenever you want. You don't have to pay to have this checking account. It's just this like super accessible cash that's there for you. The house, even if it's worth the same amount to you as it is as the cash in the account, you can't get money out of the house easily. I mean, it's possible, but it's certainly not easy. There are ongoing costs to maintaining that house. The house you get to live in, which is nice. You can't live in your checking account. But so one isn't better than the other. They're just really different. And then let's look at the retirement account that's worth the same as the other two. The retirement account hasn't been taxed yet. So maybe it looks like it's $100,000. Maybe you actually get like $60,000. And maybe in that retirement account, it's invested in stocks. And let's say the day that you look at it last, it's worth $100,000. But then on the date of separation, let's say it's worth $50,000 because the
Dollars.
market has taken a dive.
Yeah.
That determines what your portion of it is. And it's so important. And the choosing the data separation is such this like contentious thing because it can be a strategy like, oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
if we like, oh, well, this is our data separation. And they're like, no, 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 this is our data separation because this is advantageous for me for
Yep.
whatever reason. So that sort of thing is so important. And if you're hearing this and if you're thinking, well, how do I know? Like, how do I know what the differences are between the types of accounts that we have or the types of investments? This is all confusing. Don't worry, it is confusing. It's not just you. This is super complicated stuff. But you should take some time to look at what you have, do some Googling, call someone who, call a investment savvy friend or family member that you have, or call and reach out to a financial planner because they don't all, I mean, some people will charge hourly. You can just get an hour of their time and ask questions, but you do want to make sure that you understand these financial things that you're going to be making these really important decisions about.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to be an expert in every single thing. Just get familiar with what you have. And that, the planning stuff is something different altogether, but like start by just getting very familiar with what you have. And you shouldn't be invested in something you don't understand. That's a
Yeah.
good like rule of thumb too. So just make sure you understand your current kind of puzzle pieces.
Well, yeah. I mean, and it gets complicated when you're a couple because sometimes he's investing in things or the spouse is investing in things that, y- you're not involved in.
Yeah.
So yeah, knowledge is king, as they say. Now, let's talk about a little bit about, gaining independence as a woman through finances, right? Like you start off, usually, let's say you graduate or you start a job or whatever, and you suddenly have this income coming in, right? And let's say, for the sake of making it simple, there's more, you spend less than what you make, right? Where do you start with saving? Like, how do you start saving? How do you choose your investments? That kind of thing.
So what I see people get discouraged when it comes to saving because they don't know how much they should be saving and they don't really know what they're saving it for. So, what I would start with is make sure that you have an emergency fund. That is so foundational. You need to have a chunk of cash that you can access that's cash. It's not in anything else, it's not invested in anything. It's just cash that you have in case your water heater breaks, your car needs new tires, your kid needs braces, and maybe some of those things aren't necessarily emergencies. A lot of things, a lot of expenses that are irregular that just happen once every once in a while. Some of those are kind of predictable, so those aren't technically emergencies. But either way, you need to have some cash to cover stuff that happens in your life because it happens to all of us. We all have unexpected expenses. And you have to have cash for that because if you're going to use your credit card every time something happens with your car or your appliances or whatever, you're not going to be in a good situation in the long run. That's what you need to plan for that in advance, and you need to have cash for that. Once you have your emergency fund, then you can start thinking about, okay, what do I need to be saving from my monthly earnings? And there's rules of thumb, but what I think you should do is look at an online calculator or talk to a financial planner and figure out how much do I need to be saving? Because if someone's like, oh, well, just save 10% of your income, it's like, well, they don't know what your income is and they don't know what your goal is during retirement or when you want to retire or how much money you want to have during retirement. So I think do a little bit of investigation into how much you actually need to save.
Yeah.
And there are these online calculators that I love. You put in, this is what I'm making now. This is the age that I think I might want to retire. And you can just pick an age. You don't have to know, when you're 30
Yeah.
years old, the day that you're going to retire. And this is how much income I think I might need during retirement. And I would just stick with your current or your current expenses because
Yeah.
people's expenses are actually not that much different usually in retirement than they were during their working years. So just like pick some basic numbers. Let's just assume your expenses stay the same. I want to retire when I'm 65. And then just kind of work backwards from there, which I know probably it's probably sounds easier than it is, but just get someone to help you with it. It'll be like an hour of someone's time with a financial planner to help you figure out how much you need to save. But it's so worth it, because if you start saving the right amount in the beginning, especially when you're starting your career, you're golden. You don't have to save 50% of your income to get caught up. It just makes things so much easier when you start early, and you don't have to save nearly as much of your income the earlier you start. And so getting an idea of how much I need to be saving, and then you need to figure out where to put the savings, which is something different altogether. But if you work for a company that provides you a retirement plan, I would take advantage of that, especially if they match any of the money that you put into your own account. And then they will usually give you a list of investment options to choose from. And it's usually not a giant list. It's not usually very overwhelming. It might be 10 or 20 funds or whatever to choose from. And you can usually there's like a financial advisor that's attached to your employer plan that you can say, hey, help me pick out some funds. So at any point of any of this process, you can get help. It might be free help. It might cost a little bit, but you can get help, and it's help that you need because you want to make sure that you're on the right track.
I think what happens sometimes to people, I probably did happen to me when I was younger, is you kind of find it a little overwhelming, and then it's going to take time, and you're just like, what's the big deal? I'll just do the standard stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, and I think that maybe it's because you're afraid, or you're uncomfortable talking about money, or whatever it is, right? So do you have any advice for like getting over that fear? Like, do people come to you with like uh, fear of money, or not knowing how, or ashamed because they don't know what they're doing and that kind of thing?
totally. They're scared of what their future might look like. They feel guilty about mistakes that they made in the past with their finances, or they feel guilty that they don't know more. There's so much emotional baggage with that. And I see it with almost everyone. But and especially if you're scared to, or if you don't want to put the time in, you're kind of putting it off, and you kind of don't want to face your financial facts. All I can say is, when you know your situation, and when you have a plan, and when you're doing what's part of the plan, there's a sense of peace that comes out of that. And I don't know if everyone gets that same sense of peace, but I certainly do. And I see that in my clients. Like, I see the difference when they come to me versus when they're done. I see this peace that they have, because they're not wondering, am I doing the right thing? Am I, maybe they're freaking out about the value of their 401k when they don't need to be, or maybe they're worried that they can't get divorced because they're not going to have enough money. Like, not knowing creates a lot of stress, even if you're kind of used to that kind of stress. But when you can offload some of that, it feels really good. So
Yeah.
it's an investment of time, and it might be an investment of money to get help or whatever, but you will feel better about your future. And that is something that is worth a lot to me. One less thing to worry about. I've got plenty of things to worry about. I'm happy to get rid of some.
Absolutely. Yeah. So would you advise someone to reach out to a financial planner? Some people are just getting out of college, maybe they're making 50, 70K a year versus, somebody who's further along in their career and maybe has some, more diverse investments, or has bought a home or whatever it is. When do you think people should, obviously from day one, they should be aware of their finances, but reach out
Yeah,
to a financial planner?
I don't think there's ever a bad time to reach out to a financial planner, but anytime you have a change in your situation, whether that's a new job, a raise, retirement coming up, getting married, getting divorced, graduating college, any sort of change to your financial situation, I think it's a good time to reach out to someone. I mean, ideally, the earlier the better, but I don't think every 20-year-old needs to go out and hire a financial planner. And especially when you actually are making some income, I get so sad to see people who have
Mhm.
really strong incomes, but they never learned the habits, and
Yeah.
they never had a plan. And so all of this work that they did, all this hard work and all of this income that they earned, which is fabulous, but it was for nothing. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it just makes me sad. Like you that could have created this thing that is building, but it's not. And but I don't blame them, because who teaches you these things? You don't learn this in school. You don't learn it from your parents necessarily. So it's like I don't blame anyone for not knowing the right thing to do, because it's not clear.
Yeah.
It's just confusing. So
And I have to admit, like once you understand the game, my husband is much better at this than I am. I'll be the first to admit it. And he has educated me a lot. I've been lucky in that regard. Like he's chosen to educate me rather than keep me in the dark. Um, and I have to admit, like he amazes me sometimes. Like he figures out the game. I remember when we first got married, we had a little bit of debt on some credit cards, and he was just like, he got a 0% interest credit card in the mail. He's like, that's for a year. I'm moving everything to that. And we're going to rearrange our budget so that we pay it off within a year and at zero interest. And that's going to save us. He's a human calculator. He's an engineer. He's like a human. He's like, that'll save us. And I'm
yeah.
like, how did he do that? Right? Like it's kind of funny. But so yes, I want to encourage people to do it, because I think once you get the game, right, it becomes so much easier, and I would agree that you do feel much more empowered, and you'll be able also like I, like you'll be able, when other people talk, to realize some of the fallacies. Even when you're voting, you'll be able to say, oh, this person really knows what they're talking about, this person doesn't. Like someone the other day said to me, like, what did they say? Like, Elon Musk has this much dollars and he just gave away, X billion. We could feed like the entire planet and still have 10 billion. I'm like, you don't understand how his wealth works, do you? Because the minute he starts selling Tesla, that stock tumbles. All of his wealth is tied to Tesla. That's what net worth is. It's not, he doesn't have $90 billion sitting in a bank, right?
Right.
Like, so like the basic misunderstanding sometimes around wealth, I think can help you in other areas of your life
Absolutely.
as well. So I have this interesting question. I think I'd love it maybe for the younger woman or woman just entering a marriage. Like, do you have any advice on how to set up finances? So that at least, okay, let me preface this with, I think it's important that women have their own money that is not joint.
Yeah.
And the spouse can have that as well,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
But what any tips on like how to set up your finances to have kind of empower you in this relationship?
That is a personalized thing. So like whenever
That's tough.
someone,
Yeah.
because I get the question, should we have joint finances? Should we keep them separate? And I'm like, well, it really depends on the person. But what I would say is know your own expenses.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe you don't know what your husband spends on, you know, I don't know what your husband spends money on, but
Cigars,
no
let's say.
cigars.
Yeah.
Mine spends money on cigars. So know your own expenses. Know how much income you are bringing in. And if you're not bringing in income, that's totally fine. You know that it's zero. That's fine. Um, but just knowing your expenses is something that is not many people have that figured out yet. I'm like, just
Yeah.
know what you're spending money on, because you don't have to restrict yourself, but just simply having the awareness of where your money is going can change your behavior naturally.
Hmm.
Because some people don't even realize, oh, I didn't even realize I'm spending $300 a month, at Whole Foods on whatever. Like,
Yeah.
just try to be aware of the day-to-day stuff. And I think that it's great to have an account with your own money that's just yours. I wouldn't keep it a secret. I
No.
don't like secrets with financial stuff, but
Hmm.
I think that's fabulous. And both sides, they should have that too. Like if that's something that they want,
Yeah.
because they can make their own decisions. They don't have to think about the other person. They don't have to worry about it. They don't have to feel judged or whatever.
Hmm.
And that can feel empowering. And that can bring you a sense of empowerment. I think that's great. And then just having like communicating with your partner to make sure that you're on the same page, to make sure that you're aware of what the other's doing, and make sure that you're working towards the same goals is a huge thing that I think a lot of people don't talk about together.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we saving for? How much are we saving, if anything? What do we want to do in the next 5 years, the next 10 years? What are our goals for our kids? What are our goals for our living situation? Like, just be on the same page about that stuff, because when someone doesn't understand the other's motivations, there can be a lot of problems that come out of that. And so I would say, and if you're just getting into it, I would say like establish these habits in the beginning and establish the communication in the beginning, just to make it easier in the future for you.
Mm-hmm.
But also do what's best for you. And if it's best for you to keep separate accounts, then that's fine. And if it's best for you to keep joint accounts, that's fine too. Like I see people do it all every which way, and it just depends on the person. But like be flexible, be willing to be flexible, and figure out just what works best for you. But keep the communication going, and keep the awareness of the day-to-day and the long-term goals.
Would you say also like have clarity around, let's say you don't have joint finances, you've decided to keep your finances separate. Great, wonderful. All right. But the fact is if he takes out a credit card and maxes it out, you as a spouse are still semi-responsible for that, right?
Absolutely.
It falls onto your credit card. So is it a good idea, for example, to have ground rules around when you're expected to be informed? Like, okay, you have a separate account, but if you're going to go out and take a credit card, I need to know about it.
Yeah, I think ground rules are great. Like any purchase over $1,000 or something, we're going to discuss. And it's not that you have to ask permission. It's just, you're just going to keep the other person in the loop. And even if you have separate accounts, I don't think that means keep everything separate, don't know what the other person's doing. I think there should still be communication. And I think there might need to be even more communication because you're not seeing it. I think as long as you know what the other's doing, any which way that works for you is fine.
Yeah, and one thing I would know, just like if you're in a bad situation or like a temperamental, there's a lot of great technology these days in terms of like, oh, someone took money out of your bank account or someone charged something a credit card. You can get alerts.
Absolutely. I love alerts.
Yeah.
I love alerts. You can use them in so many creative ways. Even if you want some sort of accountability system for yourself, you can set an alert so that anytime you spend more than $10, you get an alert. And all it does is it just reminds you, hey, you're spending money.
Yeah.
But if you have a spouse, set an alert that's over whatever the agreed amount is. And it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that you just know what's going on. Because I see married couples where one spouse has no idea that the other has racked up $100,000 in debt, or they've been gambling, or they have no idea. And by the time they learn what's going on, it's too late. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's there, bad things can, I don't know what that saying is, but something about things that grow in the dark. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, mushrooms.
Bad
I
things
don't
grow
know.
in the dark.
Bad things.
Bad things grow in the dark. Yeah. Yeah. No, I just think alerts are especially like it just for any kind of change in behavior,
Yeah,
like, a spouse stopping their direct deposit, like that kind of stuff. It's just important to know,
absolutely.
you know. Anyways, Rachel, so now I get to ask you a funner question. I know finances are supposed to be fun, but sometimes, sorry, they're not that fun. But now I get to ask you a fun question, which is, what is a weird habit or ritual you have that brings you joy?
I was thinking about this, and the thing I think of is not really that weird, but it's weird how weird it is. If that makes any sense. It's weird how weird it is to me. So I have twin 4-year-old boys.
Oh,
So my
wow.
house is just pure chaos, 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
And my little moment of joy, and I don't get to have this that often, is if I wake up before they do and I can go and make a cup of coffee and sit on the couch with my iPad and my cup of coffee in silence. That is, I feel like I've hit the jackpot. And
Yes.
that I used to have that when they were really little because they got up at the same time, but now they are just waking up earlier every day. And I'm like, all I want in life is to just sit on the couch and drink some coffee in quiet. And that's a real treat for me. Not that that's
No.
weird, but it's become weird because it's so infrequent.
No, I'm totally with you. I actually get up at 4:30. My kids are 13 and 9, but I get up at 4:30 in the morning, 4:35 for that, just so that I have.
Peace. Just have
Yeah.
some peace.
Well, because I have them, and then I have, aside from talking to people on a podcast, I also own a bakery with my sister, and all my work is interactive. So
Yeah.
people are talking to me all day long, and I'm a bit of an introvert. So I need my downtime. So that I get up
Yes.
early, or I can tell when I haven't had. Actually, my who can tell the most? My spouse can tell when I haven't had. He's like, "You haven't journaled today, have you?"
Yeah.
No. Yes, I can tell.
You're running on empty.
You're running on empty, exactly. Well, Rachel, it was a pleasure having you. And for those of you listening out there, if you would like to hear more from Rachel, you can download her free ebook, 5 Things Newly Single Women Should Do First to Protect Their Finances. She is also offering a free 30-minute strategy call. You can book it right on her website, www.trueworthfp.com/book-a-call. You could also catch her on Instagram at TrueWorthFP, all links in the show notes below. As always, I'd love to hear from you about this episode. What is your biggest struggle with finances? Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Farrah Haidar. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when a new episode is available. Also, I'm giving away a PDF of some of the best quotes we've had on the show, beautifully designed to print and journal your thoughts. Email me at farrah@farrahhaidar.com and title it Quotes. Talk to you soon. Till then, chase your happy.